The male's gaze is dead, or is it? Who women are really getting work done for? She books the appointment, she sits in the chair, she says the words almost every practitioner has heard 10 times, 100 times over. I just want to feel like myself again. But here's the question that nobody asks out loud. Which self? Is it the self that she noticed before the lines? Is it before the breakup, before she started spending 40 minutes a day on an app that showed her a version of her face that she's never actually had? Welcome to The Line Eraser. I'm Dr. Carol Eisenstat. Today, we're going somewhere a little bit uncomfortable, a little different. We're asking the question that lives underneath every consultation, every before and after, every I do it for me. Do women get work done for themselves? Or are we still performing for an audience that we pretended that we started caring about? The male gaze. Is it dead, or did it just get a rebrand? So let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning, because before we can answer whether the male gaze is dead, we need to understand what it actually is. And I promise this isn't going to be a gender studies lecture, okay? The term was coined in 1975 by a film theorist named Laura Mulvey. Her argument was simple, but it was devastating. In cinema, the camera doesn't have a neutral eye. It has a male eye. It lingers on women's bodies. It frames them as objects to be looked at rather than subjects doing the looking. Women on screen existed to be seen, but the men, they existed to act. That was film. But the concept didn't stay in the film industry, in cinema. It seeped into advertising, into fashion, into the beauty industry, into quiet, persistent messages that a woman's value is tied to how she appears to others, specifically how she appears to men. And for decades, that was the conversation. Feminists pushed back, consumers pushed back, the narrative slowly started to shift. By the time we hit the 2010s, a new story had taken a hold. Women are doing this for themselves now. The beauty industry is female-led, female-driven, female-celebrated. Think of the rise of the self-care era, the skin industry as therapy, aesthetics as empowerment. The language completely shifted, it changed. And look, there's a truth in that. There genuinely is. But here's where it also gets interesting, because at the same time that the language is shifting, that I do it for me was becoming the accepted answer, the aesthetics industry was exploding. Botox bookings, filler appointments, skin treatments, procedures that didn't even exist 20 years ago, now booked casually over a lunch break. So the question I keep coming back to now is this: did the male gaze, did it actually die, or did it just become embedded in the culture, so internalized that we stopped being able to see it really at all? Because there's a difference between a woman choosing freely and a woman choosing freely within a system that was built to make her feel like she's never really quite enough. And so that's the difference that we're going to be pulling apart today. So let's talk about the phrase, I do it for me. I've heard it. You've heard it. Every practitioner in this industry has heard it. It's practically like a reflex at this point. Someone asks why you got work done, and before they've even finished the sentence, the answer's already forming. You already see it brewing. I just do it for myself. It makes me feel confident. It's just self-care. And again, I want to be really clear here. I'm not saying that that's a lie. For a lot of women, it's completely genuine. Feeling good in your skin is real. Confidence is real. The joy of looking in the mirror, liking what you see, that is real, and it matters. But here's the uncomfortable part of this. When and where did your idea of feeling good come from? Because none of us grew up in a vacuum, right? We grew up in a world with magazine covers, with movie posters, and now infinitely more powerful than either of those things, social media feeds that are algorithmically designed to show us an idealized version of the female face approximately 400 times a day. We absorbed what beautiful looked like before we were old enough to even question it. And a lot of what we absorbed, the smooth skin, the lifted brows, the defined jaws, the full lips, maps almost perfectly onto what has historically been considered attractive to the heterosexual male gaze. So when we say I do it for me, who taught us what better actually looks like? Now, this is where the conversation usually goes a little off because people hear what they think means that women can't genuinely make choices, that every decision is just internalized oppression. And that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that choice and conditioning can coexist at the same time. You can genuinely want something and also have been shaped to want it. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. And pretending that they are in either direction is where we stop telling the truth. There's also something else that's worth naming here. And this one's something that's less talked about. It's the female gaze. We know it because increasingly the most powerful audience women are performing for isn't men at all. It's other women. It's the comment section. It's the friend who notices your skin looking incredible. It's the before and afters that gets 10,000 saves and views. And here's what makes the female gaze so much more complicated than the male gaze. It's wrapped in the language of support. You look amazing. What did you do? Tell me everything that you did. Tell me everything. There's no obvious villain here. The pressure is distributed across thousands of small, warm, seemingly positive interactions, a community holding each other to a standard that nobody actually voted for. Women are now holding each other to the same standards that the male gaze created. And in some ways, that's even harder to escape because at least when it's coming from the outside, you could push back on it. But when it's coming from the inside community, from people who look like you and sound like you and say they're doing it for themselves too, where do you even begin to question it then? And there's also one more layer to this that I think we need to name directly because we're living inside of it right now. The algorithm gaze. Because increasingly, the audience women are performing for isn't people at all. It's just a machine, an algorithm that rewards certain faces, certain aesthetics, certain combinations of symmetry and smoothness and youth with reach, with visibility, with the feeling of mattering. Nobody told you to look like that, but the system has been quietly, consistently, statistically rewarding it for years. And humans respond to reward. That's not weakness. That's just how we're wired. So we've gone from the male gaze to the female gaze to now the algorithm gaze. And what's remarkable and maybe a little sobering is that the standard at the center of all of these really is roughly the same. That's not a coincidence. That's a system. That's not criticism of women. It's a criticism of the water that we're all kind of just swimming together in. And I think the most honest thing that we can do in this industry, especially, is to stop pretending that the water isn't there. So let's bring this into the room where it actually happens. The treatment room, the consultation room. Because everything that we've talked about, the conditioning, the standards, the I do it for me, it all eventually lands in one place, a consultation chair, a practitioner across from a patient, and a conversation that's almost never as simple as it looks. I've spoken to a lot of people in this industry, and when you ask practitioners, really ask them off the record, just honestly, what drives their patients through the door? The answers are fascinating, but they're also consistent. Yes, there are women who come in completely self-directed. They know what they want, why they want it, and they leave looking and feeling exactly how they intended. That exists. It's real. But there are patterns also. The first one I call it's the relationship appointments. We see it all the time. A woman books in quietly after comments from a partner. It's nothing dramatic, just like a throwaway remark about looking tired or a photo that caught her off guard or the creeping suspicion that something has shifted in how she's being seen at home. She just wants to look refreshed. She says that she's doing it for herself. And maybe by the time that she's sitting in the chair, she genuinely is. But the door that brought her there, that's worth paying attention to. The second pattern, I think that every practitioner in this room will recognize, it's the divorce appointment. A woman comes in at a specific moment, a relationship ending, a new chapter that's beginning, and the energy is different. It's not a quiet energy, it's charged. There's something that's there to be reclaimed. And honestly, sometimes that's the most empowered version of I do it for me that we ever see in this industry, because that's the woman who isn't performing for anyone. She's rebuilding, and that is a completely different thing. But there's also a third pattern that doesn't get talked about as much yet. I think it's the preemptive appointments. So this one is a little subtler. It's the woman, or increasingly it's the young woman, who comes in before anything has visibly changed, because she hasn't lost anything yet. She's not here to correct. She's here just to prevent, to stay ahead of something that she's afraid of losing. And when you really listen to what she's afraid of losing, it's rarely about health. It's about being seen, about continuing to be perceived as a certain way, about not crossing some invisible threshold where the world starts looking at her differently. And that appointment is doing a lot of emotional work. It doesn't come labeled in as that, but it is. And that brings you to the emotional tension that doesn't get talked about enough. When a practitioner suspects that a patient is sitting in that chair because of an external pressure, a partner, a comment, algorithm, an insecurity that was planted by somebody else, what is the practitioner's responsibility? Do you ask? Do you continue and proceed? Do you refer this patient? Most practitioners, we're not trained. We're not trained psychologists. They're not there to therapize their patients, but they are, whether they signed up for it or not, the last line of conversation before a needle actually goes in. And I think that that's a weight that this industry doesn't talk about nearly enough. Because the most skilled practitioners I've ever encountered don't just understand faces, they understand people. They can read the room really well. They know the difference between a woman who's choosing and a woman who is coping. And sometimes the most powerful thing that a practitioner can do is to put the needle down. I've talked about women this entire episode, and I want to stay there because that's where most of the cultural weight lives on in this topic. But I'd be doing a disservice to this conversation if I didn't spend a few minutes on the other side of the room, because male aesthetics patients exist, and they're one of the fastest growing demographics in this industry. And when you ask them the same question, who or what are you doing this for? The answer, it's also fascinating. They almost never say, I do it for me. Not because they aren't doing it for themselves, because the cultural permission structure is completely different for men. Men in the aesthetic space often frame it in functional terms, competitive terms. I want to look sharp in meetings. I'm back in the dating market. I want to look as good as I feel. The language is achievements oriented. It's goal-based. There's almost no equivalent in male aesthetic conversations of the soft, vague, emotionally complex, I just want to feel like myself, because men haven't been given the same cultural script that teaches them that their appearance is both deeply important and something that you're not supposed to openly want. Women have been giving two contradictory messages their entire lives. Look perfect, but don't let anyone see that you're trying. The natural expectations are unique, specifically to female. Men can walk into a treatment room and say, I just want to look better, without the same layer of cultural negotiation. And here's what I find interesting about that. So it means that the discomfort isn't about vanity, it's about permission. Women haven't been told that wanting to look good is wrong. They've been told that openly wanting it, that admitting the wanting, it's what's transgressive. You can get the work done, you just can't need it. The I do it for me just isn't an answer, it's a permission slip. And the fact that women need to give themselves that permission and men don't, that tells us a lot about who this industry was built around, right? Who it was built for, and which messages get absorbed the hardest and the deepest. So I want to talk about something that I don't think that gets enough airtime in this conversation, because the relationships that women have with beauty, with aesthetics, with the question of who they're doing it for, it doesn't look the same across every generation. And I say this as a millennial who has watched the landscape shift in real time, okay? So let's start with the generation before mine. These are the Gen X women who came up in the 80s, and the 90s, the era of supermodels, of heroin, chic, of being handed a magazine, told implicitly, explicitly, constantly, this is what beauty, the standard is. You either meet it or you don't. And there was no conversation about it. There was no nuance. The male gaze wasn't something anyone was naming yet. It was just like in the air. And for a lot of those women, aesthetics came later. It was corrective. It's private. You don't talk about it. You quietly just look after yourself and nobody noticed, and the shame is built in. Then there's my generation, the millennials. We are the generation that's the in-between generation in every single possible way. We grew up pre-social media and came of the age inside it. We watched the conversation about beauty standards shift from magazines to feeds. We were the first generation to see our own faces reflected back to us constantly. Tagged photos, front-facing cameras, the sudden jarring reality of what we actually look like from the outside. Scary, right? I know. We responded in a way that really specific. We became the generation of informed choice. We researched treatments. We asked questions. We built a language around empowerment and self-determination that felt like a genuine departure from what came before. But we also grew up wanting to be the cool girl, the low maintenance girl, the girl who just like woke up like this. So even as we're booking the appointments, a lot of us were also desperate to look like we hadn't. The natural results became everything, not because we wanted to look natural. No, we don't want to look natural, but because we still want to be seen as women who don't need it. And that tension, that's deeply, specifically millennial. Now, let's go into Gen Z. And this is where it gets really interesting now. It changes. On the surface, Gen Z looks like the most liberated generation yet. They're louder about body positivity. They push back on diet culture. They call out filters and Facetune and unrealistic beauty standards with a confidence that's a little humbling. And yet Gen Z is the fastest growing demographic in the aesthetics market. They are booking consultations younger than any generation before them. Not to fix something, not to correct something, but preventatively, before the lines even show themselves. So what's going on? What is this? Part of the answer is something that researchers have started calling the Snapchat dysmorphia. And so let's talk about this quickly. It's specifically because one of the most underreported mental health phenomena of our time. Snapchat dysmorphia is what happens when you spend years looking at filtered versions of your own face. Smooth skin, enlarged eyes, lifted features, a jawline that your actual jawline has never once produced. And then you look in the mirror hasn't changed, but your baseline for everything has. Practitioners are now, and I want to be careful here because this is a clinical observation, not judgment. We're seeing patients come in with their phones out, pointing to a filtered selfie saying, I want to look like this. Except the face in the photo isn't a real face, it's a composite, an algorithmically enhanced simulation of what an app decided would be more attractive version of yourself. And the aesthetics industry is being asked more and more often to close the gap between a human face and a digital rendering of one. That is fundamentally new thing. Gen X wants to look younger. Millennials want to look like their best natural selves. Gen Z, in some ways, want to look like their avatar. I think what's happening more broadly is that Gen Z has done something really sophisticated and maybe a little contradictory. They've rejected the language of beauty standards while completely absorbing the pressure of them. They don't want to be told that they need to look a certain way, but they also grew up on TikTok where algorithms decide whose face gets seen and who doesn't, where a particular look, the clean girl, that girl, the effortlessly symmetrical girl gets rewarded with attention and reach. They've just found a new way to perform the same standard. And they've done it so fluently that it doesn't even feel like a performance anymore. So across 3 generations, the silence of Gen X, the informed empowerment of millennials, the vocal yet conflicted freedom of Gen Z, the through line is the same. The standard really hasn't changed. Only the story we tell ourselves that it has. So, who are women really getting work done for? I've been sitting with this question for a long time, and honestly, I don't think there's a clean answer. I don't think there's supposed to be in this, because the truth is, probably, it's all of it, all at once, in different measures, on different days. Some days it's genuinely for you, completely, purely, unapologetically for you. And that's valid and that's enough. And nobody gets to take that from you. Some days it's for the version of yourself that you want the world to see. The one that feels competent and polished and in control. And that's valid too. And some days, if we're really being honest, it's because the world has spent a very long time making women feel like their face is a problem that needs to be managed. And we all are, to varying degrees, still navigating that. We're still learning it. None of those things can cancel each other out. What do I think? This is the part that I want to leave you with, is that the awareness matters. Not guilt, not shame, not the kind of overanalysis that makes you second guess every decision you make about your own face and your body. Just an awareness. The willingness to ask the question, to sit with it honestly, even when the answer is complicated, even when it implicates systems that are bigger than any of us, even when it implicates ourselves. Because here's what I know about the women in this industry: the physicians, the practitioners, the patients, the ones building businesses, and the ones who are sitting in the chair. They are not passive. They are not victims of a beauty standard. They are sharp, self-aware, complicated human beings making real decisions in a world that is genuinely complicated. And the most powerful thing that we can do in this industry and in this entire conversation is stop pretending that the question doesn't exist. It does. The male gaze may or may not be dead, but the conversation about it, that's very much alive. And that's exactly where I want to keep it. This conversation. We need to talk about it. I'm Dr. Carol Eisenstat. This has been The Line Eraser. If this episode made you think, made you uncomfortable, or made you want to call someone to talk about it, good. That's what it's supposed to do. That's what it's exactly intended for. This is The Line Eraser, and I'll see you next time.